Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are more surely believed among us, even as they deliver them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things at the very first, to write unto thee in order, O most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. So here's the beginning of the book of Luke. We see an introduction here by Luke, the physician. We know that he's a physician, referenced by Paul in Colossians, I believe it was 4, verse 3 or 4, where he said, to the good physician, Luke. So we know that his profession was a physician. So, especially in those days, they were considered learned men. Paul was a very learned man. You can tell by his style of writing in the Bible, his words, and his description, ability, how he was able to, reason abstract, concepts and compare abstract concepts, among each other, and to just, make a comparison on so many different levels. When he was brought before, I forget which ruler it was, when he was in prison, he actually said unto him, thou art beside thyself. Much learning, to make thee mad. Because, his reasoning, he was reasoning into so many things that, you could tell that he was like a philosopher. He was one that, considered the deep things of life. That he was led out to the desert and ministered unto by Jesus himself. So maybe, that was the beginning of his wisdom, or maybe he was always like that. In this introduction in the book of Luke, we see the physician writing, and we can tell that, he has a level of intelligence and that he has been, schooled. You can always tell the difference between somebody who has had a deeper level of, education, just by how they communicate, their thought pattern, how they're able to reason things out, how they're able to problem solve, how they look at the world. They're not limited. And we know that it does not require schooling for success. How many successful entrepreneurs do we have in the world that did not, complete school? I have a close friend. His father did not, finish high school, but he owns one of the most successful, businesses, back home where I'm from. But I say that to say this. Here he gives an introduction, and we see him writing onto one called Theophilus. On doing some research on Theophilus, not much, was to be found. A lot of people, they have many theories about, him. They'll say that, it's actually a reference to the body of believers itself. That's one theory. Another theory is that it's a person of, noble, character, of nobility, most excellent Theophilus. And they were said that this was used to refer to those of the title of a Roman governor. So being a governor and Roman, most excellent, that was their title. So they will reason that he was a Roman, dignitary of some sort, a diplomat. Walking through this introduction, we get a sense of many things. We get the sense of, one man taking on immense challenge, him attempting to bring together, all the cows and line them up and give an official detail, as much as he can. Because, a lot of things in life, are like that. And, we've gotten so much, wisdom and knowledge over the years from, the different, ventures, the different people that came up, each one being expert in their field. Like, we have an expert in relationships. We have an expert in cooking. We'll have an expert in teaching. We'll have an expert, in making coffee. We'll have an expert in, certain foods, certain plants, For everything that exists now in this world, we can find an expert that's really good at it. And if you notice that this expert, they do what the very first, verse, this, is attempting to communicate. That, having been around, having seen, things, having been through the system, having mastered it, having considered it, long in reflection, he's able to give, his point of view, which is going to be, detailed, it's going to be sensible, it's going to be, dependable and reliable. We get a sense of humility from the grace of his words that he has chosen. We can tell that he's not pig-headed. He's not claiming to know it all. And, he's really a man that believes and is also after the truth. He's one that's seeking and one that's searching. And we get a sense that, he's honest. He's not going to give us anything that doesn't, believe to be true if he doesn't absolutely, without a doubt, know that it's true. He even praises his own understanding. He gives this with a sense of encouragement. This is to support, those that believe. I say that because, at the end of Jesus' story, he was betrayed by so many people. First with Judas, the multitude asking for Barabbas to crucify him, them whipping and scourging him, mocking him, spitting upon him. When he was on the cross, they continued wagging their heads, save yourself. He saved others, himself he cannot save, And it seemed as if, they had such a short memory to forget, all the things that he did for them. How many of them he helped, with those incurable diseases that were possessed with devils, all the afflictions that they suffered, bringing back even some from the. And it seemed as if all they had was negative things to say about him. And a lot of things in society is like a herd mentality, herd belief. We often find popular opinions among a larger, part of society that they share the same belief and values. And Jesus being an offender, being a fake, being no good, it seemed as if that this was the final conclusion that the people had, as they were crucifying him. Him dying, not being around to defend himself, not coming back and, proving himself unto them, but rather only to, his followers. How many people were hurt, by this, belief, by these lies? How many people were hurt? The chief priests, elders, scribes, even the high priest, especially the scribes. And I always say, because the scribes, they were the experts in the faith. They were the experts in doctrine that was written. They were the ones that could tell you what prophecies to look for, how everything lined up. And they could even probably give you a timeline of, when things were to happen. They were the expert in the detail. Like how Paul is considered such a learned man. Like, they would be the ones that Paul would sit and debate with. So it seems as if, everybody's having something negative to say about Jesus at this point. And we thank Luke, for his gracious words, reassuring us that things that we believe that they are true, right? How many people are able to stand for truth, even in the opposition? So many numbers coming against them. As a whole multitude said, crucify him, give us Barabbas. How many people were able to hold on to their belief of him being a good person, that he was here only to do good? As a matter of fact, to save. How many people changed their mind based on what everybody was saying? So we get a real encouragement here from Luke, the physician. He was not a part of the original 12, disciples. Peter, he has his book. John has his book. John, he does have one, right? John, he's the only one that has a gospel, the book of John. And he also has John 1, 2, and 3, if I'm not mistaken, and it is the same John that they talk about. But he was always considered the disciple that Jesus loved. So maybe that could explain it. And the book of Revelation is actually by, John. The revelation of St. John, the divine, is what it calls it. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, for as much as many as taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are more surely believed among us. So we get this, sense that this task has been undertaken by many. I mean, as you can imagine, Jesus being the Son of God, his story, how he was crucified, the miracles that he did, and the doctrine, especially the miracles and the doctrine. Because remember, nobody was doing anything like this. If we see any of the things that he did, being done in the Old Testament, it was a one and done. Not the way Jesus did it, how he would heal this person, walk a few feet, heal this next person, preach this gospel, this doctrine that we never heard before, tying together the final thoughts of God concerning salvation, concerning, exhortation, concerning, righteousness and holiness, how men should live, how they should carry themselves, debunking and exposing all the incorrect, doctrine that was being given to the people by the scribes and Pharisees, even the chief priests and elders, exposing, showing the truth, as hard as it was, as difficult as it was to receive. When Jesus was here, I mean, he left such a mark. Is there anyone in the world that does not know his name? Even if they don't believe that he is the Messiah, is there anyone that does not know his name? That's a question I could ask. So this, gives us the sense that many have set forth to, capture this story, give their, opinion, or to give their recollection. Now we know to be on the lookout, right? Because the chief priests, elders, and scribes, them being in charge teachings of the temple and the synagogue, them being the very ones that sought false witnesses to put him to death. What a great disservice they do to people. It was their very intention to bring these false witnesses. It was their intention to deceive and to create, something that was not true, from scratch, right? Because he was such a threat to their way of life. Them wanting praise of men, making broad their phylacteries, enlarging the borders of their garments, standing on the street corners, loving to be called rabbi of men, all the hypocrisy that they taught. It was really about gain, money. It was so much, about profit, what one could gain, and not so much, about the purity, being a man of God, of teaching the ways of God in truth, and righteousness, preparing people to meet this God that we all, know and believe to exist. They had gone off on such a tangent, and instead of allowing Jesus to bring them back to where they needed to be, they chose to eliminate him, instead. So now, him being a threat to their life, to their doctrine, him being a threat to everything they taught, being a threat to their lifestyle. When they write their reports, can you imagine what they're gonna write? He accused them that that they encompass land and sea to find one proselyte. And when they do, they make him a twofold more child of hell than themselves. Now keep this in mind. This was just with the law of Moses and the books of the Old Testament, making people children of hell just with that. So now here we have, Jesus coming, being the Messiah. Jesus said, he that believeth not on the Son of Man, he's damned already. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father except he come by me. Paul said that original branches were broken off so that, Gentiles could be grafted in. Therefore, boast not thyself against, the branch, for bear it thou and not that thou bear it. So them making people twofold more children of hell, without the appearing of Jesus, without turning people against Jesus. It's for this very rejection that they themselves will now be turned away. And, the Gentiles being brought in. And, because remember, it was them, like I said, that started this whole campaign. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when they had killed the Passover, they held, they got together and came up with the idea that they might take him by craft and put him to death. But even they said not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. Then we saw Judas sit down with him when that lady came with the expensive oil, the alabaster box of spikenard, 300 pence worth, and she broke it on him. After that, he went out and promised that he would betray him unto them, and they promised to give him money. Then they came at the Garden of Gethsemane after the Last Supper and took him. So they engineered this whole thing from the beginning, create this false, to present, Jesus as being a offender, a liar, casting out devils by Beelzebub, and all the other lies that they told. So now, them having gotten rid of him, if you ask the question, to what lengths now are they gonna go to ensure that he does not have any positive effect or any influential effect on anybody that is born in this Jewish nation? Can you imagine the teachings that they have on him to get the people to forget him? Can you imagine the things that are said about him in the temple? But there's something that you cannot deny, the things he did. Because, imagine them being up there bad mouthing him and saying all these things. And then somebody comes in there with a withered hand. Somebody comes in there having leprosy. Somebody's child is sick to the point of death, like Jairus' daughter was. And they come, saying, I know that there's power in here because I've heard of people being healed of these very things. In that moment when they ask for help and healing, and these, chief priests, elders, and scribes, and Pharisees, Sadducees, when they're unable to help this person, but them being crafty, they're gonna find a way around it. And with enough time passing and nobody else getting healed, people they're gonna forget. Or they might even have what we call cognitive, dissonance, where they'll believe that it never really happened. It was just like a fairy tale or like a fantasy. So there's a great danger because now they're gonna incorporate this into their scrolls and they're gonna take this now. If they were making children, people twofold children of hell, just based on the law of Moses, I mean, the law of Moses is for our edifying and further understanding, but the gospel of Jesus Christ is all you need. A person can survive without the gospel of Moses, without the books of Moses, the doctrine of Moses. These things, they give us a greater understanding. They give us greater lessons that we can extract, and apply to our lives today to understand, the history of God, how he made certain decisions, why certain things were so important to him. What things were important, what things were not, what things absolutely got the people in trouble. To learn from these things, the Bible says all things that were written beforehand were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scripture might have hope. But the gospel of Jesus Christ is all you need. So now them having such a powerful weapon, we're gonna, directly, get at these people, to turn them against, Jesus of Nazareth. To this day in the Jewish nation, even I have, Jewish friends, they say that they don't believe that he is the Messiah. This thing has been passed down generation to generation. How did they get so bad? Somebody somewhere came up with something. Just like today we see pastors getting up preaching things that's so crazy. You wonder how could, you have a fasting and praying relationship with God and, come up with a conclusion like this. They just sit on their bed, late at night, and then these ideas come to them, having no intimacy or relationship or guidance, from God. Having not a heart of that's been cleansed and purged, because, it is a process. And the problem is that we can't look at a person and determine who has gone through their process and who has not. And everybody is given a fair chance. And then a lot of people come and they spread some bad things. So you see, with each, error that a person learned in their lifestyle, they would teach that to the next generation of scribes, right? Because they came up with it, obviously. And then now, this being taught to them by their teacher, they keep this. And then they, in their lifetime, come up with their errors. And that is passed down to the third one. So now he has two errors, the one that taught him, and then the error of the first one that taught the second one. So now he in his lifetime gets his error and adds that. So now we have 4 generations of errors, and then that gets passed to the fifth. He develops his misconceptions, and then down we have 5 generations of errors that gets passed to the sixth, and he develops and it continues. So now imagine all of these generations passing down their errors. When Jesus came, he had so many problems with them. Did he have nothing but problems? Did he ever have anything good to say about them? So now add this. The danger of this one is that this was a unanimous agreement that Jesus of Nazareth is not the Messiah. He's a liar. He's not to be trusted. Careful of his doctrine. Be careful when you hear anyone trying to tell you about him. It's like in life, today, where we'll have like somebody who's a con man and they've conned people out of their money. And then, he comes like in the vicinity and you try to warn people, hey, don't trust this guy. He's gonna come. He's a con artist. He's gonna eventually ask you for money for some investment. Then he's gonna just take your money and go and run. This is kind of like how they're passing Jesus of Nazareth down to the generations after. And now understand that this is gonna stick out more, than all the other things that they have to teach. This is gonna be at the top of the tree. Jesus of Nazareth. Be on the lookout for this. Insurrectionist, insurgent. So now, little boys and girls, they're taught to hate Jesus of Nazareth. A little child, he's gonna believe whatever you tell him. And what a dangerous thing that they create. If you notice, certain kids, they grow up having had, racist, parents, and you can see, it, showing in them. And I've been around these kind of unfortunate people. They were just taught this thing so young, even in this modern day. They know better to keep it hidden, but then there'll come times when you see it and know that this was taught to them from what they believe to be a loving parent. They received it, and it's the same way they're gonna receive these bad words about Jesus. And let me ask a question: if Jesus said that no man cometh to the Father by me, then do we have children being born into damnation? That's my question. For as many as taken in hand, set forth in order a declaration of those things which are more surely believed among us. So taking in hand is, undertaking task that he is doing right now. Set in order a declaration. So we don't go around hearing different stories from different people, but we compare all the stories together and we give you one final thing. And it's many that have attempted this task. And as I just explained, some is going to be positive, some is going to be negative. Those things which are more surely believed among us. Because like I said, the whole world knows this name. There's nobody that has ever came that has left such an impact, as Jesus Christ. Even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. All right, so here we have a more clearer picture being painted of where it's coming from. So even as they delivered them unto us, through eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. So we're talking to people that have seen, people that were there. It might be several generations later. But these people, they have a reason to give an account. So now, as he said, go and preach the gospel to all the world. So this is how this ends up being delivered unto them. But then, preaching of the gospel, one is not going to give as a detailed account, especially not in one sitting. But this is more of like a biography being handed down, and not just the preaching of the gospel. This is more thorough, more encompassing, more likely to include the things that, if you were just preaching the gospel, maybe you wouldn't need to emphasize or include, these little bits and tids and bits. But, then again, all things are necessary, right? So even as they deliver them unto us, which were eyewitnesses. So, I'm seeing, in those days, they like to hold court where they would commune. These learned men, they would come together and they would have discussions. So, these discussions, they were not official business. Like maybe after they got done, being the physician that they were, or being the clergy, serving in some public office, then they would get together for more, social call that wasn't so much, official business. But then, the topic of discussion, it was noble things. So, these eyewitnesses, discussing this amongst maybe those that were not there, maybe those that were born after that, they saw bits and pieces. Jesus, he was always traveling. He went to many regions round about, by sea, by walking. Whenever word got around that he was there, then the multitude would gather unto him, and it would be so much that it would throng him. Many times he would have to teach, like by getting into like a boat and sailing out a little bit into the water so that he could see everybody on the shore. So not only eyewitnesses, but ministers also of the word. We know that Philip, was sent by the Holy Ghost into the chariot of that Ethiopian eunuch, and he expounded unto him the word of God in a more excellent manner. So, Jesus, when he was risen, right, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, then he appeared to the two which were unnamed, and then he appeared to all of them as they sat at meat. Then he appeared to, was it 500? So now, in this appearing, this final appearing is where he commissioned them, sending them, to baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. Because, after his crucifixion, if you remember, they were so depressed. They were just at the house mourning and weeping, and they thought all was lost. They thought that, he was defeated, and, false alarm. We just gotta put the pieces and go back to what we were doing. One would get the sense that if he did not appear unto them after his resurrection, that they would not have, gone forth with everything that they learned, everything they observed, everything he taught them, to even operated in the power that he gave them over unclean spirits, cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and diseases. If I was to give my opinion, I would say that they would not. Because, in one gospel, he appeared on, they were back fishing in the boat. Peter, when he told them to let the net down to the other side, they said, we have caught, no fishes. So, they went back to the life that they had before and not what they were, told to do, because, they saw his death as failure, not keeping in mind that he was, needed to be the sacrifice for mankind to atone. So even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seemed good also unto me, after having also perfect understanding of all things which were at the first, to write unto thee in order, O most excellent Theophilus. So it seemed good unto me. So, after reflection, after being empowered, so for it to seem good unto him, he had to be reflected. He had to be empowered, to write something, to know that he could make a difference, to know that, his contribution would, not only help people, but, change the world, clear up some things which were, maybe up in the air being, disputed. So, having had, perfect understanding of all things at the first. So, this was observed in reflection. They said that life is lived forward but understood backwards. What is the mind that does not reflect? The mind that does not reflect does not learn from its life's lessons. It doesn't apply them to future situations, to get wisdom, act in wisdom. So there was an aha moment, for this guy, for him to realize that he also had perfect understanding of all things, right? Because how many of us, walk around with so much experience and information and we're unable to make something of it, until you get that aha moment as he did, for him to testify to himself, having had perfect understanding of all things, which were, even at the first. So after having this, aha moment that he does have understanding of all things, then it seemed good unto him. So here we have, a leader taking initiative. Here we have, a builder, somebody that's willing to take the initiative, to take the lead, and especially among men. We know that back in those days, we didn't, they didn't have the technological, what I would call, distractions that we have. There was no Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, no YouTube, all these, everybody glued to their phones, social media, following trends, looking at other people's videos. When it was just these books, and this was serious business back then. So, him taking it upon himself to make this connection and then realize that he has something to say. So it seemed good unto me also, after having had, understanding of all things which were at first, to write unto thee in order, O most excellent Theophilus. So this is being addressed, like I said, to Theophilus. As I said, some would say that, it refers to the body of believers like you and me. Some would say that it's more specific. Most excellent was a Roman governor's title. We see him, this name also being mentioned in the book of Acts. So the last one says that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. So no, here is, the good message for believers. Here's our encouraging, voice. This verse, like I said, especially in those days when so many were saying that Jesus was an offender, not having a perfect grasp like we do of human psychology, where, we're able to say that people come to deceive. And we're able to say that, you can't always follow the crowd. They weren't able to say these things. These things that we have as, common knowledge, they did not have these things. And it's such a shame that he did so many great things for them. And then he could be forgotten, just by the unanimity, just by the unanimous voice, all that would, not deny his work, so that thou mightest know for sure the certainty of things, delivered unto you. So this gospel, his works, his teachings, Jesus the Christ, he's here using his name to add credibility to this name that they are trying to tarnish. He's standing behind it. He's giving a gentle nudge, to move forward, to take it up, because, the picture that you get is that he has heard these things, through the grapevine. He might not have been an eyewitness or a minister, but enough of it has gotten to him where he's able to ask a question, and even ponder on it and even wonder, is it true or not? Maybe even believing a little bit, but then being pulled, in many different directions by those who would tarnish, Jesus' name, try to, tear down what he came to build. So that thou mightest know for sure the certainty of the things wherein thou hast been instructed. So you've been instructed by, somebody else. And I'm here to stand behind their works. I'm here to stand behind, what they taught you and their gospel, about the gospel. We have enough saying that it wasn't true. And it's something to be careful and watch out for. All right, so then, he's going to start giving his account, all things that happened. So understand that this book of Luke is really a letter to Theophilus. All his miracles, his healings, preachings, his doctrine. So, he spent, I didn't, skip ahead to see how many chapters the book of Luke has, but it has many. It's a lot of words. To know that, he come, to affirm that it is true. Don't follow the naysayers and the people that are trying to tear him down. And he's going to give you the entire account. I am Straw Greenhorn.